On my 62nd birthday, my son didn't bring flowers, he brought paperwork. He hugged me and called it a routine form for the bank. I signed without reading. A week later, I was legally evicted from my own house, and my son vanished, along with the furniture and my trust in him. But there was something my son didn't know. In the garage, buried under old boxes, sat a locked safe. And inside it, a letter that changed everything. I opened it only when I had nothing left to lose. The Oklahoma sky stretches like an endless canvas painted in soft blues and dusty pinks. At 62, Margaret Maggie Lawson has come to measure time by the play of light across her front porch. Her ranch sits just outside of a small town near the red earth of the Cimarron River. The clapboard house, built by her grandfather, has weathered dust storms and ice, but it still stands sturdy and warm. Inside its walls are memories of birthdays, late-night homework sessions, and long conversations over coffee. Maggie's son, Jason, is 35 and lives an hour away in the city, though he seems to orbit her only when convenience demands it. He arrives when there is something he needs: a loan to cover an overdue bill, a free meal to save him a grocery trip. Between these visits, Maggie's world is filled with quilting projects, her garden, and the company of her aging Labrador, Duke. Maggie's ex-husband, Richard, also drifts on the edges of her life. Once a high school history teacher and now a retired truck driver, he lives across town in a modest apartment. They divorced amicably 10 years ago when the strain of raising a teenager without shared values eroded their partnership. Yet they have remained cordial for Jason's sake. Both carry their own regrets about parenting. Richard often recalls their early years when the couple worked multiple jobs to pay off the mortgage. Discipline was his domain, affection was hers. Maggie had always believed that a loving home filled with hugs, praise, and open doors would give her son resilience and happiness, a belief supported by studies that show parental warmth fosters higher self-esteem and better mental health. She hugged Jason often and listened to his stories late into the night. In contrast, Richard held on to the conviction that children need clear boundaries and natural consequences to learn fairness. He read articles about how patient adults who help children navigate their perceptions of justice teach them to expect fairness and foster empathy. When Jason shouted, "It's not fair," as a boy, Richard would sit with him and ask why he felt that way, teaching him to distinguish between perceived slights and genuine injustice. Sometimes, in Maggie's eyes, his lessons seemed stern. At other times, he failed to follow through, arriving home too exhausted to enforce rules. Their different approaches, one warm to the point of indulgence, the other principled yet inconsistent, left Jason with mixed messages about responsibility. On a crisp fall morning, as the first frost silvered the fields, Maggie receives a letter from the county clerk's office. At first, she thinks it is a routine notice about property taxes, but the envelope feels heavier. She opens it at the kitchen table, Duke snoring at her feet, and unfolds a document with official seals. According to the letter, her home has been transferred by quitclaim deed to Lawson and Darnell Holdings, LLC. The signatures are scrawled versions of her own name, except she never held a pen to sign them. At first, she laughs, assuming it is a clerical error, but a line at the bottom warns that she has 30 days to vacate the premises unless she challenges the deed in court. Maggie's hand tightens on her mug. She recalls reading a state advisory that scammers sometimes impersonate property owners using fake IDs and forged documents. The advisory mentioned remote notarizations and sellers who refuse to meet in person. She had clipped the article but never imagined it could be relevant to her. This letter doesn't name a buyer, but the LLC catches her attention. She thinks of Jason's friend Darnell, a real estate agent who is always dressed in crisp suits and speaks with an easy charm. Darnell once boasted that he helps investors find bargains, though Maggie wondered at his methods. Could this be a mistake? She picks up her phone to call Jason, but a pang of pride stops her. "He'll think I'm worrying for nothing," she mutters. Instead, she calls Richard. When he answers, his voice is groggy, but he listens as she reads the letter aloud. There is silence. "That's serious, Mags," he finally says. "You need to go down to the county clerk's office today." Maggie dresses quickly and drives to town in her old pickup. The clerk, a woman younger than Jason, pulls up the deed on her computer. "It was filed last week," she explains. "Signatures were notarized remotely. Looks like you signed, and there's another signature for Lawson and Darnell Holdings." Maggie's stomach clenches. She shakes her head. "I didn't sign anything." The clerk nods sympathetically. "We've had a few cases like this. People have been filing warranty deeds with forged signatures and notary seals to confuse the chain of title and claim ownership of homes. It's a scam we're seeing more of." The reality dawns on Maggie like a thunderclap across the plains. Her home, the anchor of her life, has been stolen on paper. She thinks of Jason's visits, of his sudden interest in real estate, of Darnell's late-night calls. She recalls Jason complaining about being held back by his upbringing, hinting that his parents' modest means limited his ambitions. Did she, in her attempts to show love, fail to teach him the value of fairness? Did Richard's occasional sternness inspire rebellion rather than respect? In the clerk's office, those questions swirl with the dust motes in the afternoon light. Outside, the wind begins to pick up, carrying the scent of dry leaves. Maggie grips her keys, her mind already spinning. She cannot let this go. Yet confronting the truth may mean confronting her own son. Driving back from the county office, Maggie's thoughts unravel along with the country roads. Each cottonwood tree she passes seems to whisper a memory. She remembers Jason at 5, standing on this very porch with his hair tousled, cheeks flushed with sun, insisting that he'd been cheated when his father made him share toys with the neighbor's child. She'd knelt down, wiped his tears, and told him gently that fairness meant sometimes giving up what you wanted. Richard had stood behind her, his arms crossed, adding that justice was not always equal but always rooted in rightness. Now, decades later, those early lessons echo as she contemplates a betrayal that cuts deeper than any childhood tantrum. She is not naive. She has seen greed disguised as need. Local news recently covered a case where people posted fake eviction notices on homes, citing forged deeds and past due taxes. Officials warned that some scammers were filing warranty deeds with forged signatures and notary seals stolen from other documents. They cautioned homeowners to contact the sheriff's office if someone tried to claim their house by paying delinquent taxes. Maggie had watched the report with idle curiosity, shaking her head at the audacity. Now those warnings feel like a premonition. She pulls into her gravel driveway and sits in the truck, watching the sun dip behind the barn. Her phone buzzes with a message from Jason. "Hey, Mom, can we talk? Need to ask a favor." Maggie flinches. She hasn't told him about the letter. She texts back, "Call me tonight." Then she walks inside, the scent of cedar and old books enveloping her like a protective shawl. She places the deed letter on the table and stares at it until the lines blur. When she hears the engine of a familiar truck, she looks up to see Richard parking outside. He climbs the steps slowly, his arthritis making each movement deliberate. Maggie opens the door before he knocks. Richard scans her face and then the document on the table. "I called my friend at the sheriff's office," he says without preamble. He said this happens when someone files a fraudulent deed. They can claim your house and sell it quickly to an unsuspecting buyer. We need to act fast. Maggie sinks into a chair. Who would do this? She whispers. Do you think Jason? She can't finish. Richard rubs his jaw. We have to consider it, Mags. He's been short on money. Remember he mentioned that Darnell had some investment opportunities? Maybe he got in over his head. They sit in heavy silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock. Richard takes a breath. Look, whatever Jason's done, we need to get the deed reversed. I'll help you. I still care about this place and about you. The admission softens something in Maggie. She remembers the man she married, the way he'd read to their son by lamplight, the way he'd draw boundaries with fairness even when it was difficult. She also remembers the nights they argued over finances, when he'd leave to haul freight across state lines, missing birthdays and recitals. Their shared history is messy, full of affection and disappointment. Now, unexpectedly, they are allies. They go through the file cabinets for proof of ownership, the original deed, tax receipts, photographs of Maggie standing in front of the house over the years. Maggie calls the county clerk again, who instructs her to file an affidavit of fraud and contact a title attorney. Richard suggests they also talk to Darnell. If he's involved, maybe he'll tell us what Jason is up to. Maggie hesitates. She likes Darnell. He always greeted her warmly at church fundraisers. He is Jason's friend from college, a man who built his business in a field where African Americans often face barriers. He once told her he wanted to provide affordable housing to marginalized families. How could he be part of this? Yet the LLC name Lawson and Darnell is a glaring clue. They decide to confront Jason first. That evening when he arrives, he enters with his usual breezy confidence. His hair is slicked back, his shirt crisp. Hey, Mom, he says, leaning in to kiss her cheek. Hi, Dad, he adds with a hint of surprise. His eyes dart between them and the papers on the table. What's this? He asks, feigning innocence. Maggie slides the fraudulent deed toward him. Jason's face pales. Where did you get that? He asks. It's fake. Someone's messing with you. Is it fake? Richard's voice is steady. Because your name is on it. And Darnell's. And your mother never signed this. Jason swallows. His confident demeanor cracks. Look, I can explain, he begins. He goes on to tell them about a business venture Darnell proposed. Darnell, he says, had found a loophole to acquire properties from out-of-state owners by paying their tax debts and reselling the houses. Jason admits he invested some money. I thought it was legit, he insists. I didn't know they'd file anything on your house. Maggie's heart twists. You used me, she says softly. You knew this house was free of liens because we paid it off decades ago. You thought you could take it, sell it, and I'd be too old to fight back. Jason's jaw tightens. No, I was going to tell you. I was going to make it right. I just needed some cash up front to get into the deal. You always said you wanted to help me. Maggie feels anger and sorrow mixing like oil and water. She had indeed always been there when he needed money. Perhaps she had never required him to work hard enough for what he wanted. The love that studies say can give children resilience may, without boundaries, become enabling. Richard steps between them. We need to fix this, he says. Tomorrow we're going to the sheriff's office. If Darnell forged documents, we will press charges. You need to come clean. Jason bristles. Press charges? Against me? Against Darnell? Dad, you can't be serious. Richard meets his gaze. This isn't about us anymore. It's about the law. When parents provide explanations and consequences, they teach their children to expect justice. This is your consequence, son. Jason's shoulders slump. He looks at his mother. Maggie's eyes fill with tears. She reaches out but withdraws her hand before touching him. I love you, she whispers, but I will not let you steal my life. And if facing the law is what it takes for you to understand fairness, then that's what we will do. As the evening deepens, the family fractures and binds at the same time. Outside, the cicadas begin to sing, their chorus a melancholy hymn. Maggie feels the weight of what lies ahead, yet she also feels a strange clarity. The road to justice will not be easy, but it begins with this painful conversation. Somewhere in the distance, a storm grumbles, promising both destruction and renewal. Night falls heavy over the Lawson farm and sleep eludes Maggie. She lies awake, listening to the creak of the house as if it were breathing. Each room holds a piece of her story. The living room's bookshelf, lined with tattered novels, reminds her of nights spent reading to Jason when he was sick. The kitchen table bears nicks from countless craft projects. As she moves from room to room, she is aware that her sanctuary has become a battleground. Her mind replays the afternoon. Jason's panicked face, Richard's firm stance, her own trembling hands. Love and betrayal coil tightly within her chest. She sits by the window watching the moon cast silver light on the yard. In the distance, she sees the outline of the old swing where Jason once sat for hours, complaining about unfair chores. Back then, Maggie had learned to respond not by dismissing his complaints, but by encouraging him to talk through them. Research shows that children need adults who listen and help them sort out what's merely unlikable from what is truly unjust. She had tried to be that adult. Yet somewhere along the way, the conversations shifted to requests for money rather than discussions of fairness. She wonders if she conflated providing love with erasing all of Jason's hardships. She thinks about the Pew study that found parents who strive to raise their children differently from their own upbringing often focus on giving more love and affection than they received. Maggie's parents were distant and stoic, rarely expressing warmth. She had vowed that her son would never doubt her love. But love without expectations can sometimes breed entitlement. In the morning, Maggie and Richard drive to the sheriff's office. The building smells of coffee and disinfectant. A deputy escorts them to a small room where they meet Deputy Sarah Collins, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Maggie hands over the fraudulent deed and her original paperwork. Sarah listens carefully. We've been dealing with a rise in deed fraud, she explains. People file warranty deeds with forged signatures to claim ownership. It's a serious felony. We will investigate. She asks about Darnell. Maggie describes him, noting his charm and his status as a respected realtor. Sarah nods. Sometimes scammers use legitimate professionals to lend credibility to their schemes. We'll need to speak with him and with your son. Jason arrives later, escorted by Richard. His posture is tense, his eyes bloodshot. He reluctantly sits down across from Deputy Collins. Tell me about this LLC, she says calmly. Jason shifts. Darnell said he knew owners who wanted to get rid of properties quick. I invested because I needed the money. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I didn't sign my mom's name. He glances at Maggie, as if hoping for a sign of forgiveness. She offers none. Sarah asks him to provide the documents he signed and any communications with Darnell. Jason hesitates, then nods. As the investigation unfolds over the next few weeks, details emerge. Darnell had indeed discovered a scheme. identify properties with no liens, impersonate the owners using forged IDs and remote notarization, a red flag in the state advisory, then sell the properties under an LLC. He recruited investors like Jason, promising quick returns. Jason, struggling with debt and feeling overlooked in his own career, saw an opportunity to finally get ahead. He rationalized that he'd repay his mother later. Darnell, for his part, had rationalized that the victims were wealthy absentee owners. He hadn't anticipated targeting someone he knew. When he realized that Jason submitted his mother's address, he balked but went along after Jason insisted she'd never know. The fraud went farther than either expected. Maggie watches as layers of truth peel away. She sees Darnell at the sheriff's office, his confident facade crumbling. He admits forging notary seals cut from other documents to make the fraudulent deed look real. He expresses remorse, explaining that he grew up in poverty and wanted to build wealth quickly to prove himself in an industry where he often faced discrimination. Maggie listens, feeling a mixture of anger and empathy. Darnell is not a cartoon villain. He is a man who made unethical choices under pressure. His race, which Jason had cynically invoked to shield their scheme under the guise of supporting a Black-owned business, becomes part of the story, not as a stereotype, but as a glimpse into systemic challenges. Maggie knows that justice must be impartial, yet she also understands the nuance in people's motives. Meanwhile, Maggie and Richard prepare the legal challenge. The attorney they hire explains that reversing a fraudulent deed requires filing a suit, providing evidence of ownership, and petitioning the court to invalidate the fraudulent document. It could take months. Maggie attends each hearing with a mix of dread and determination. Jason sits on the opposite side of the courtroom, his gaze avoiding hers. Richard sits beside Maggie, sometimes squeezing her hand. In private, they discuss their past decisions. Richard admits that his long hours on the road meant he often left Maggie to handle the emotional labor. He regrets not being there to model responsibility. Maggie confesses that her fear of being like her own cold parents led her to indulge Jason too often. They vow to face the consequences together, even if it means testifying against their son. The chapter ends with a letter Maggie writes late at night but doesn't send. "Dear Jason, my love for you has never been conditional. I held you when you cried, celebrated your victories, and forgave your mistakes. But love is not the absence of accountability. I hope you understand that fairness and justice are not abstract lessons. They shape our lives, and they shape you now. Whatever happens, I pray you will find your way." She folds the letter and tucks it into her journal. Outside, the wind picks up again, rustling the cornfields. The fight for her home and for her son's soul has only begun. The first court date arrives with the cold bite of winter. The courthouse in town, a brick building with granite columns, is both majestic and intimidating. Maggie and Richard enter through the metal detectors and wait on a hard wooden bench. Jason sits a few feet away with Darnell and their respective attorneys. He looks thinner, his face drawn. He hasn't responded to Maggie's letter, but his eyes flicker toward her, then away. The courtroom is filled with people whose lives are on pause because of paperwork and signatures. Each case on the docket is a testament to the weight of legal language. As the judge calls their case, Maggie feels her heart hammer. The attorney presents evidence. The original deed with Maggie and Richard's signatures, tax records, photographs, and testimony from the notary, who signed the fraudulent document. The notary testifies that she never witnessed Maggie sign anything, and that her seal on the fake deed had been cut from another document and pasted. Darnell's attorney argues that his client thought he was acting within the law. Jason's attorney paints Jason as a naive investor. When Maggie takes the stand, she speaks quietly but firmly. "My home has been the center of my family for generations," she says. "It's more than property. It's part of who I am. I did not sign that deed." She glances at Jason, and for a moment his eyes well with tears. The judge doesn't rule immediately. Property fraud cases are complex. The law must untangle intent from negligence. Outside the courtroom, reporters ask questions. Maggie declines to comment. She is weary, but she is also resolved. She knows that her fight is not just about bricks and mortar. It's about establishing that deception, even by a loved one, has consequences. It's about drawing lines that, once crossed, require accountability. She thinks of research that shows children need parents to be both loving and firm, to avoid using physical punishment, but to set clear expectations and boundaries. She wonders if she and Richard had balanced those roles well enough. Maybe not, but she can balance them now. In the weeks following the first hearing, community members approach Maggie at the grocery store and church. Some offer sympathy, others gossip. A few ask why she would press charges against her own son. Maggie surprises herself by answering honestly. "Because fairness matters," she says, "and because my love for him doesn't erase his responsibility." Her words sometimes shock. Those who assume maternal love must always be lenient. Yet they resonate with others who have faced similar betrayals. An older woman tells Maggie about a grandson who stole her savings. A man confides that his brother forged his name on a loan. Their stories create a network of shared pain and resilience. Maggie and Richard also begin counseling with a therapist, Dr. Elena, who specializes in family estrangement. In her office, decorated with watercolor landscapes, they unpack decades of parenting choices. Dr. Elena listens, then points out patterns. Maggie often equated support with financial assistance. Richard equated justice with discipline, but withdrew when conflict escalated. They talk about how fairness is learned not through lectures, but through lived experience and consistent modeling. Dr. Elena encourages them to set healthy boundaries with Jason going forward. "He is an adult," she says. "You can love him and still let him face the consequences of his actions." That boundary is, in itself, an act of love. While the legal process grinds on, Jason's life unravels. He loses his job after news of the charges spreads. Friends distance themselves. He moves into a small apartment and takes on odd jobs. At night, he lies awake, replaying his choices. He remembers his mother's constant hugs, his father's lectures about fairness. He thinks about how he always felt deprived, watching peers from wealthier families travel and upgrade their cars. He believed he deserved more. Darnell's offer seemed like a shortcut. Now, confronted with the reality of harming his own mother, he feels shame. He begins to see that unconditional affection cannot excuse exploitation. Darnell faces his own reckoning. The real estate board suspends his license pending investigation. Friends and clients express shock and disappointment. He sits in his office, staring at the motivational posters about providing homes for families, and reflects on how far he has strayed from his mission. He grew up hearing about systemic inequities and wanting to prove himself. He tells his lawyer that he never intended to hurt people he knew. He just wanted to break into a field dominated by bigger players. In moments of vulnerability, he reaches out to Maggie. He sends her a letter apologizing for his part in the scheme. Maggie reads it, recognizing both his remorse and his rationalizations. She does not respond, but keeps the letter, adding it to the growing stack of documents that chart the twist of their lives. Meanwhile, Richard receives a call from Judge Harrison, a former student of his, now a circuit court judge. Harrison expresses sympathy and offers to ensure due process. Richard is grateful, but insists that he wants nothing more than fairness. That night, he and Maggie sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery oranges and purples. They talk about the farmland's legacy. Richard admits that he once assumed Jason would inherit the house and keep the family history alive. "Maybe we put too much expectation on him," he says. Maggie nods. "Maybe we tried to control his choices in subtle ways, but he made his own choices too." They sit in silence, understanding that accountability and empathy can coexist. The wind rustles through the corn, whispering secrets they can't quite decipher. Months pass. Winter snow blankets the fields, then melts into spring mud. Each season brings updates from the court, each hearing drawing them closer to a verdict. In the second hearing, the prosecution presents evidence that Darnell and Jason used remote notarization services to legitimize their fraudulent documents, a red flag identified by the State Real Estate Commission. Expert witnesses testify about patterns of deed fraud and the psychological profiles of perpetrators. Maggie learns that most victims are elderly or live out of state, people who trust that their property records are secure. She feels a bitter irony that her own son exploited the very vulnerability the state warned against. During cross-examination, Jason's attorney tries to elicit sympathy by highlighting his difficult finances and his desire to support his own family. He brings up Maggie's history of generosity, implying that Jason believed he had implicit permission to use her assets. Maggie clenches her jaw. She wants to stand up and shout that love is not a blank check, but she remains composed. The judge reminds the court that good intentions do not erase illegal acts. Darnell's attorney argues that systemic barriers in real estate pushed him toward questionable practices. The prosecution counters that he had choices and that forging signatures and notary seals to claim ownership crosses the line from hustling to crime. Outside of court, Maggie and Richard continue to rebuild their relationship. They share meals, work in the garden together, and rediscover old joys. They talk about how their parenting styles mirrored generational shifts. In their youth, parents seldom expressed affection. Discipline was harsh. Modern studies show that parents who balance warmth with clear boundaries raise children who are more confident and less anxious. Maggie confesses that she thought unlimited affection alone could heal generational wounds, while Richard acknowledges that he sometimes used fairness as a shield for emotional distance. Their conversations are painful but healing, like cleaning a wound. Jason, meanwhile, begins attending therapy through a court order. He meets with a counselor who challenges his belief that he is a victim of circumstance. They discuss research showing that children thrive when parents encourage independence and allow them to learn from mistakes. Jason slowly recognizes that his parents' attempts to provide him with a better life did not absolve him of responsibility for his own choices. One evening, after a session, he calls Maggie. She hesitates but answers, "Mom, I'm sorry," he says. "I thought I could fix it before you noticed. I was wrong. I need to own that." Maggie listens, tears rolling silently. She hears sincerity, but she also knows apologies are only the start of repentance. "Thank you," she whispers. "I love you. I hope you mean it." She does not promise to withdraw the charges. The community's reaction shifts over time. At first, some neighbors whisper about the family drama. As details emerge about the scale of deed fraud in the county, including cases where strangers filed warranty deeds and attempted to evict families, sympathy grows. People realize that if Maggie had not fought, others might have been targeted. The county treasurer implements new alerts for property owners, and the local paper runs a story about the importance of monitoring land records. The story quotes an article about the Oklahoma Senate's efforts to educate brokers and home buyers on deed theft, noting that forging or altering deed paperwork will be treated as a felony. Maggie reads it and feels both vindicated and saddened that such measures are necessary. As spring blossoms, Darnell meets with his own counselor and with community leaders. He participates in restorative justice sessions, where he hears from homeowners who were nearly defrauded and apologizes. During one session, he sits across from Maggie. She watches him closely as he describes his childhood in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce. He speaks of wanting to build wealth ethically, but getting sucked into schemes that promised quick success. He admits that forging documents and exploiting trust betrayed not only his clients, but also his own values. Maggie listens, feeling a mixture of empathy and anger. She tells him that her home was not just a financial asset, it was her refuge. Darnell nods. "I'm sorry," he says. "I can't undo what I did, but I want to make amends." The sessions are cathartic. They do not erase the crime, but they humanize the people involved. Maggie leaves each meeting emotionally drained, yet strangely lighter. She begins to see that fairness and love are not mutually exclusive. Holding someone accountable can be an act of care. She also learns that systemic inequities can push people toward desperation, but personal choices matter. Darnell's story will not excuse his actions in court, but it will inform his sentence. Jason's apologies will not absolve him, but they might start his rehabilitation. One evening, after a long day in court, Maggie returns home to find a small package on her doorstep. Inside is a framed photograph of her and Jason from when he was 10, fishing at the pond. There is also a note in Jason's handwriting. "I found this in Dad's old box. I wanted you to have it. I'm sorry for losing sight of what matters." Maggie traces the photo with her finger, tears blurring her vision. She sets the frame on her mantle. The past is both a comfort and a reminder. It cannot change what happened, but it can inform the choices she makes now. She sits by the fire, thinking about how she will speak at the sentencing hearing. She wants to strike the balance between seeking justice and expressing hope for redemption. It is a delicate line, but she is ready to walk it. By summer, the case draws to a close. The courthouse buzzes with anticipation. The judge will decide whether to invalidate the fraudulent deed, sentence Darnell and Jason, and determine restitution. Maggie sits beside Richard, holding her hands clasped tightly. Jason sits with his attorney, looking pale but composed. Darnell's family is there, as are community members who have followed the case. Judge Harrison delivers his ruling methodically. He acknowledges that the fraudulent deed exploited remote notarization procedures and forged signatures, practices the state has been working to curb. He invalidates the deed and restores ownership to Maggie. He sentences Darnell to a combination of prison time and community service, noting his remorse and his agreement to participate in educational programs for realtors. He sentences Jason to a shorter term with the possibility of parole after completing a financial ethics program and community service. The court recognizes the emotional complexity of this case. The judge says, "A son betrayed his mother's trust and a professional misused his position. Justice requires accountability, but rehabilitation is also a goal." Maggie is invited to speak. She stands, her voice steady. Your Honor, she begins, I never imagined I would testify against my own child. I never imagined someone I considered a friend would forge my name. But here we are. I appreciate that the law recognizes the harm done. At the same time, I believe in second chances. I hope that Jason and Darnell will use this time to reflect and to make amends. Justice, to me, means fairness, but it also means hope. I will not be defined by this betrayal, and I will not allow bitterness to eclipse love. The courtroom is silent. Richard squeezes her hand. When Jason is escorted away, he turns to look at his parents. His eyes are filled with tears. He mouths, I'm sorry. Maggie nods, tears streaming down her cheeks. She knows the road ahead is long, for him, for Darnell, for herself. The justice system will do its work, but personal healing will take time. She feels a strange mixture of relief, grief, and resolve. Outside, the Oklahoma sun blazes down, lighting the courthouse steps in gold. People mill about, whispering, some with tears, some with relief. In the following weeks, life slowly settles. Maggie receives new deeds and locks them in a safe. She signs up for the county's alert system to monitor any future filings, following the advice that property owners should watch for unauthorized filings. She joins a community group that educates seniors on deed fraud. She and Richard continue therapy. They also rekindle their friendship, sharing dinners and laughter that had been absent for years. Their conversations about parenting shift from regret to acceptance. They know they made mistakes, but they are learning to forgive themselves. They talk about how future generations can be taught fairness through conversations by explaining natural consequences and allowing children to practice justice. They vow to share these lessons with their grandchildren if Jason ever has any. Jason serves his sentence quietly. In prison, he takes courses on financial ethics and restorative justice. He writes letters to his parents regularly, describing his progress, his remorse, and his hopes. Maggie does not always write back, but she reads every letter. She sees glimmers of the boy who once sat on the porch swing asking about fairness. She also sees a man beginning to understand that love is not a resource to be exploited. Darnell, after serving his time, volunteers with organizations that help homeowners protect their deeds. He speaks at real estate conferences about the dangers of shortcuts and the importance of integrity. His story becomes a cautionary tale, but also a testament to the possibility of change. At the end of the summer, Maggie and Richard attend a community fair. The sun is warm and children's laughter fills the air. They sit on a bench near the Ferris wheel, watching families enjoy simple pleasures. Maggie leans into Richard. Do you think we've done right? She asks. Richard smiles softly. We chose justice and love, Mags. I think that's as right as it gets. As twilight falls, the lights of the fair twinkle like stars, and Maggie feels a peace she hadn't dared hope for. Life has left scars, but it has also taught her that fairness and love can coexist, and that even in the face of betrayal, one can find the strength to stand up, to forgive, and to move forward. Years seem to compress and expand around Maggie as she navigates the aftermath of the trial. The seasons roll forward, each bringing subtle changes to the farm. But inside, time moves strangely. Memories of her son at every age flash like reflections in broken glass. Jason as a toddler with sticky hands, as a teenager slamming his bedroom door, as a man in handcuffs whispering apologies. Maggie has read that by adolescence, children differentiate between equality and equity and begin to understand complex notions of justice. She wonders whether Jason ever grasped that distinction, whether her attempts to shield him from hardship inadvertently stunted his moral development. With Jason incarcerated, Maggie's days become a mixture of solitary tasks and community engagement. She takes over the small vegetable plot she used to share with Jason, turning the soil with deliberate care. She joins a support group for parents with adult children in prison. They meet in a church basement, sitting in a circle of metal chairs. Each person shares their story of guilt, anger, and unexpected pride. One mother speaks about her son's drug conviction. Another talks about her daughter's embezzlement. They all face the stigma of having a child behind bars, yet they support each other. Dr. Elena, the therapist, often quotes research that emphasizes the importance of open communication and emotional support in families. Maggie clings to this wisdom. She writes to Jason regularly now, not because she wants to fix him, but because she wants him to feel seen. In her letters, Maggie discusses mundane events, the yield of the tomato plants, Duke's health, the latest book she read. She also weaves in reflections on fairness and responsibility. She tells him about an article she read that explained how babies and toddlers show early preferences for fairness. She writes about how she should have reinforced these instincts rather than assuming they would flourish on their own. She tells him about the Pew Research essay that showed how some parents, in trying to parent differently than they were raised, focus on giving more love and affection. I did that, she admits. I thought, if I hugged you enough and told you I loved you every day, I could erase the absence I felt in my own childhood. I forgot to pair love with expectations. I'm learning now that affection is powerful, but boundaries give it shape. Jason's responses reveal a man confronting himself. He writes about his daily routine in prison, classes, work assignments, quiet hours in the cell. He tells his mother that he has joined a restorative justice group where inmates discuss the harm they've caused and work on making amends. He confesses that hearing other inmates' stories, some of which involve violent crimes, has made him grateful that his actions, though deeply wrong, did not result in physical harm. He acknowledges the selfishness that drove him. I wanted what I thought I deserved, he writes. I thought you owed me. I see now that you owed me nothing but honesty and love, and you gave me both. I took advantage. I'm sorry. His words both soothe and pierce Maggie. Apologies cannot undo the past, but they can carve a path forward. Richard visits Jason regularly. At first, their conversations are stilted. Richard talks about the farm and town gossip. Jason listens quietly. Over time, they begin to talk about their shared history. Richard admits that he often felt inadequate as a father. He recounts nights on the road, missing milestones, and returning home too tired to discipline with patience. He mentions the research he read years ago about how high expectations and responsibility can benefit children. Maybe I put my expectations on you, but didn't model them enough, he says. Jason nods, understanding perhaps for the first time that his father's sternness came from a desire to prepare him, not punish him. Their conversations are messy and honest, filled with apologies, defenses, and eventually laughter. They begin to rebuild trust in the only way possible, slowly. Back in town, Darnell begins serving his community service hours. He speaks at churches and community centers about his journey. He tells audiences how greed and desperation can cloud judgment, how easy it is to rationalize unethical choices when you feel marginalized, and how those choices hurt real people. He also trains real estate professionals on how to recognize red flags of deed fraud, such as sellers insisting on quick, cash-only closings and remote notarizations. His openness surprises many. Some still view him with suspicion, but others appreciate his candor. He mentors young realtors, particularly those of color, teaching them to succeed without resorting to shady practices. In quiet moments, he volunteers at a youth center, helping teenagers fill out college applications. He tells them his story, not to scare them, but to show that integrity matters. Maggie attends one of Darnell's talks. She sits in the back row, her hands clasped in her lap. When Darnell speaks, he doesn't hide his shame. He looks directly at her and says, "I betrayed a friend. I forged her signature. I hurt her family. I did it because I let my ambition override my values." He then looks at the young people in the room and adds, "Don't be like me. Build your success on something that lasts." After the talk, he approaches Maggie. "Thank you for coming," he says. Maggie nods. "I'm not here to support you," she replies quietly. "I'm here because I believe in redemption. I hope you make this right." Darnell looks her in the eyes. "I will," he promises. Maggie walks away, feeling a weight lift ever so slightly. Meanwhile, Maggie and Richard participate in a new initiative at the local school district. Inspired by the research on children's sense of fairness and justice, the schools have adopted restorative practices. Teachers are trained to facilitate conversations when conflicts arise, helping students understand the impact of their actions and find fair resolutions. Maggie and Richard volunteer as mentors, sharing their story with parents and educators. They emphasize that fairness is taught not by punishing mistakes harshly, but by involving children in problem solving. They encourage parents to listen when children cry, "Not fair," and to use those moments to discuss justice rather than shutting down the conversation. They cite the Scientific American article they had read, which noted that when parents provide explanations and natural consequences, children learn to expect justice and develop empathy. During one workshop, a father asks, "What if loving your child unconditionally makes them take you for granted?" Maggie takes a deep breath. "Love should never be conditional," she says, "but it shouldn't be devoid of boundaries either." Studies show that children who receive affection and clear expectations grow up happier and more resilient. When we confuse love with indulgence, we risk raising children who think the world owes them. That doesn't mean we withdraw love when they make mistakes. It means we pair our love with accountability. Richard nods beside her, adding that fairness in parenting means sometimes making hard choices. The parents in the room nod, scribbling notes. Maggie sees hope in their faces and feels a sense of purpose. At the farm, life thrives. Maggie plants a row of sunflowers along the property line, their bright faces turning toward the sun. She thinks of them as sentinels of hope. Duke, now older, sleeps more, but he still follows Maggie as she works. Richard helps her repair the barn roof and install new locks on the house. They host Sunday dinners with neighbors, filling the kitchen with laughter. They know they may never fully reconcile with Jason, but they are building a supportive community that values fairness, love, and vigilance. The first Thanksgiving after the trial is approaching. The leaves blaze red and gold, and the air smells of wood smoke. Maggie decides to host dinner for the support group, Darnell, Dr. Elena, and a few of the teachers they've been working with. It will be an unconventional gathering of people connected by justice and second chances. On the morning of the holiday, Maggie wakes early to start cooking. As she prepares the turkey, she thinks about the traditions her own parents passed down, recipes and rituals bound by love and duty. Those rituals were part of her heritage, even if the affection behind them was unspoken. She wonders what traditions she'll leave for Jason. As guests arrive, the house buzzes with conversation. Dr. Elena brings a salad and a book of poetry. Darnell arrives with cornbread and a hesitant smile. The support group members bring casseroles and pies. Richard pours coffee and wine, moving easily among the guests. The table is set with mismatched plates and heirloom napkins. They hold hands for grace, and Maggie begins. I invited you all because you have become part of our story, she says. This house was almost lost, but we found something through our struggle. Community, understanding, and a deeper sense of justice. I'm grateful for each of you. There are tears and smiles around the table. After dinner, they sit by the fire. Darnell shares his plans to petition for reinstatement of his license after completing his sentence. He vows to work with organizations that fight deed fraud. A teacher named Ms. Rodriguez speaks about the changes she's seen in her classroom since implementing restorative practices. She says students now take responsibility for conflicts and work to repair harm rather than simply accept punishment. Maggie feels warmth in her chest. Justice is becoming tangible, not just a concept. Later that evening, as the house quiets, Maggie receives a call from Jason. It's the first Thanksgiving he has been allowed to call. His voice is thick with emotion. Mom, he says, I heard you had people over. That's good. I just wanted to say I'm thankful for you and Dad. I know I messed up. I'm learning. I'm trying to become someone you can be proud of. Maggie grips the phone, tears sliding down her cheeks. I am proud of you for trying, she replies. Keep working. We'll be here when you're ready. As she hangs up, Maggie looks around her house, the walls, the photographs, the table covered in crumbs. She feels a sense of completion and a sense of beginning. The fight to reclaim her home led her to confront not only a legal injustice, but also the intricacies of love and parenting. The crossroad she stands on now invites her to build a future where fairness and love guide her choices. She whispers a silent prayer for her son, for Darnell, for all the parents struggling to balance affection and accountability. The night deepens, and the stars over Oklahoma shine brighter than she remembers. She steps outside, breathes in the cold air, and feels at peace with the threshold she has crossed. 2 years after the verdict, a heavy summer storm gathers over the Lawson farm. Thunder rumbles low and lightning flickers on the horizon. Maggie stands on the porch, watching dark clouds roll in. She has always loved storms, the smell of rain on dry earth, the electricity in the air, the way they cleanse and renew. Today's storm brings more than weather. Jason is scheduled to return on parole, and Maggie's heart pounds with anticipation and apprehension. She has rehearsed this moment in her mind, the sight of her son walking toward her, free but changed by prison walls. She thinks of research showing that parental affection can protect children against the harmful effects of stress. She wonders if her love can now mitigate the damage of his choices. She also recalls that justice requires boundaries. She is determined not to revert to patterns of indulgence. Instead, she and Richard have agreed on clear expectations. Jason can stay in the small guest house on the property for 6 months. He will contribute to household expenses, attend therapy, and volunteer in the community. If he breaks these conditions, he will have to find another place to live. As raindrops begin to fall, a car pulls up. The door opens, and Jason steps out. He looks older, more grounded. There is a scar above his eyebrow, a reminder of an altercation in prison. He carries one duffel bag, and his posture is tentative. Maggie's breath catches. She meets his eyes, and for a moment, time compresses. She sees the boy he was and the man he is. Jason hesitates, then walks toward her. "Mom," he says, his voice barely above a whisper. Maggie steps forward and wraps her arms around him. It is a firm hug, full of warmth, but also of unspoken conditions. She feels his shoulders shake as he cries. "Welcome home," she whispers. Richard emerges from the house and claps Jason on the back. "We're glad you're here," he says. "You know the rules." Jason nods. "I do," he replies. They move Jason's belongings into the guest house. The rain intensifies, drumming on the tin roof. Inside, they sit at the kitchen table with coffee. Jason notices new locks on the doors, a fireproof safe in the corner. He nods, understanding their caution. "I don't expect you to trust me yet," he says. "I know I have to earn it." Maggie and Richard exchange a glance. Hearing those words is both painful and hopeful. That night, the storm rages. Lightning illuminates the fields and thunder cracks overhead. Maggie lies awake, listening to the roar of wind and rain. She thinks about the biblical parable of the prodigal son, but rejects its simplicity. Their story is more complicated. Forgiveness is not immediate. It requires acknowledgement and repair. She recalls reading that adolescents who experience fairness in schools and homes become more likely to defend others and uphold justice. She hopes that the fairness she and Richard now practice will influence Jason's future choices. She drifts to sleep to the sound of rain, trusting that storms, though frightening, are part of the cycle of renewal. Jason's first weeks at home are awkward. He rises early, joins Maggie in the garden, and listens to Richard's stories about local history. He attends therapy sessions with Dr. Elena, participates in a community service program that renovates houses for low-income families, and meets with Darnell, who is now fully rehabilitated and back in the real estate business, albeit with a humble approach. They work side by side on a Habitat for Humanity project, laying bricks and replacing windows. Darnell confides that his license was reinstated after he completed his sentence and education requirements. He tells Jason about the restorative justice sessions they shared and how confronting the people they hurt was both excruciating and transformative. One morning, while repairing a dilapidated porch, Jason asks Darnell, "Why did you come back to town? You could have started fresh elsewhere." Darnell wipes sweat from his brow. "Running would have been easier," he admits, "but I wanted to prove to myself and the community that I could be better. If I left, the damage I caused would still linger. Facing it here forces me to make amends every day." Jason nods, understanding the weight of returning to the scene of his wrongdoing. He realizes that staying in Oklahoma will mean constant reminders of his betrayal, but it will also offer opportunities to repair what he broke. At home, conversations between Jason and his parents deepen. Maggie shares stories of her own parents, describing their sternness and the scarcity of affection. "I didn't want to repeat that," she says, "so I went to the other extreme. I see now that love without boundaries isn't truly loving." Jason listens, guilt flashing in his eyes. Richard talks about his father, who held him to strict standards and rarely praised him. "I wanted to be different," he says, "but I sometimes mistook enforcement for fairness." Their reflections are messy, full of paradoxes. They accept that parenting is not a precise science, and that each generation reacts to the one before. They also acknowledge the role of systemic factors, economic pressures, social expectations, that influence their decisions. In therapy, Jason confronts the deeper drivers of his actions. He explores his sense of entitlement, his resentment of peers who seem more successful, and the racial biases he internalized and exploited when he used Darnell's identity as a shield. Dr. Elena challenges him to consider how he conflated his mother's unconditional love with a license to take advantage of her. They discuss research showing that children benefit when given autonomy and allowed to face natural consequences. Jason sees that his parents often shielded him from those consequences out of love, inadvertently stunting his ability to cope with failure. Accepting this is painful, but liberating. He realizes he must build resilience now. Jason also takes a job as a clerk at the county clerk's office, the very office where the forged deed was filed. The irony is not lost on anyone. Under the supervision of Miss Bennett, the clerk who originally helped Maggie, Jason processes property documents, learning the intricacies of land records. He helps homeowners sign up for the lien alert system, which notifies them if any documents are filed on their property. He educates people on the red flags of deed fraud, echoing the warnings he once ignored. Each time he processes a deed, he remembers the one he falsified. The job is both penance and purpose. It gives him a chance to prevent others from being victimized. Miss Bennett, at first wary, eventually respects his dedication. As months go by, the storms of summer give way to crisp autumn days. The guest house becomes a comfortable space for Jason, filled with secondhand furniture and books. Maggie notices subtle changes. Jason no longer asks for money. He offers to pay for groceries. He volunteers to fix the fence without being asked. He invites her to attend his restorative justice group's open meeting. There, he publicly acknowledges his wrongdoing, describes the impact on his mother and community, and discusses how he is working to change. Hearing him articulate the harm he caused and the steps he is taking to repair it brings Maggie to tears. She feels pride and sorrow, hope and caution. One Saturday, Jason suggests taking a drive to the lake they used to visit when he was a child. Maggie and Richard agree. As they sit by the water, tossing stones and watching the ripples, Jason says, "I want to share something." He pulls out a small journal. "I've been writing about fairness and justice. Remember how I used to complain that chores weren't fair? You'd always listen. Dad would make me explain why I thought something was unfair. I hated it then. Now I see those conversations were about more than chores. They were about values." He reads an entry about how fairness isn't always equal, referencing a study he read in prison that explained how children learn to distinguish between equality and equity as they age. "I'm learning that fairness means giving people what they need, not just what they want," he says. Maggie smiles, feeling the layers of their journey. Jason's growth doesn't erase the past, but it reframes it. It shows that even deep wounds can heal when met with honesty, accountability, and enduring love. Richard places a hand on Jason's shoulder. "We're proud of the work you're doing," he says. "Keep going." They sit in companionable silence, listening to the water lap against the shore. As winter approaches, the family prepares for their first holiday season together post-parole. They decide to volunteer at a shelter that serves meals to families in need. On Christmas Eve, they stand behind a long table, ladling soup and passing out rolls. Jason recognizes a man from his restorative justice group and shares a knowing smile. Maggie watches a young mother with 2 children, her exhaustion etched on her face. She thinks about how easy it would be for someone to exploit her vulnerability. Maggie leans over and tells her about the importance of monitoring property records and about the resources available. The woman listens, grateful. At home, they decorate a tree with handmade ornaments. Jason hangs a small wooden house ornament he carved in prison. It symbolizes the home he almost lost and the new foundation he is building. They sit by the fire, sipping hot cider. Maggie reads aloud a letter from Darnell, who writes that he has started a scholarship fund for students from marginalized communities to study real estate law. He invites them to the launch event. Maggie feels a surge of gratitude. Redemption, she realizes, is not a single act, but a series of choices. The chapter concludes with Maggie journaling by candlelight. She writes, "Our family has weathered storms of betrayal and anger, but we have also experienced renewal. We are learning that justice is not cold vengeance, but a pathway to restoration. Love is not blind indulgence, but a guiding light that helps us make hard choices. Fairness is a practice we must model and teach every day. These lessons have come at great cost, but they have also given us strength." She closes her journal, blows out the candle, and walks to her window. The Oklahoma night is clear, the stars sharp in the winter air. She feels the solidity of her home around her and the resilience within her heart. She whispers a silent prayer of thanks and turns toward the future with cautious hope. 5 years have passed since that autumn night when a fraudulent deed threatened to uproot a family. The Lawson farm has become a testament to endurance and renewal. Sunflowers still guard the property line, and the fields yield a modest harvest each year. Maggie, now 67, moves more slowly but still tends her garden with care. She has become an advocate for property rights, traveling to community centers across Oklahoma to speak about deed fraud. She brings handouts, cites statistics, and tells her story. She always includes the warning signs: sellers who insist on rush closings, remote notarizations, and forged documents. She encourages homeowners to sign up for County Alert System. Her audience listens intently, inspired by her courage. Jason, now 40, works full-time at the county clerk's office. He has earned certifications in paralegal studies and helps manage the Lien Alert program. He also volunteers with a nonprofit that provides financial literacy courses to young adults. He spends weekends mentoring teenagers in underserved communities, telling them his story and teaching them about fairness and accountability. He uses his past not as a badge of shame, but as a tool for education. He often quotes the Scientific American article that asserts, "Children need patient adults to help them practice talking about justice," explaining that adults too must practice. His parole is complete, but he chooses to stay near home, building trust brick by brick. Darnell has become a respected voice in real estate reform. His scholarship fund has supported dozens of students studying property law and urban planning. He speaks at national conferences about ethics in real estate, sharing his story as a cautionary tale. He collaborates with lawmakers to strengthen laws against deed fraud, working with the Oklahoma Senate to support continuing education for brokers on recognizing signs of deed theft. He and Maggie occasionally speak together, their partnership a symbol of reconciliation and progress. Maggie and Richard's relationship has evolved into a deep friendship. They never remarried, finding contentment in their independence, but they spend most days together. They travel to visit their grandchildren, Jason and Anna, a woman he met in a restorative justice workshop. Anna understands Jason's history and values his honesty. They have 2 young children, Grace and David, who toddle around the farm chasing butterflies. Maggie and Richard shower them with hugs and stories. They also teach them about fairness by involving them in simple decisions. If the children fight over a toy, Maggie asks them to suggest solutions. fostering empathy and problem solving. She draws on the lessons she learned from the Medium article, guiding children to think about how others feel and finding fair solutions. She pairs this with unconditional affection, remembering that warmth and boundaries together create resilience. One summer afternoon, as the family sits beneath the shade of an old oak tree, Grace asks, "Grandma, why do people have to go to jail?" The question hangs in the warm air. Maggie thinks before answering. "Sometimes people make choices that hurt others," she says. "We have rules to protect people. When someone breaks those rules, they may have to go away for a while to learn and make things right. It's not because they're bad forever, it's because they need to understand the impact of what they did." Grace furrows her brow. "Did Daddy go to jail?" she asks. Jason and Anna exchange a glance. Jason takes Grace on his lap. "Yes," he says. "I made a big mistake. I hurt your grandma by trying to take her house. I had to go away to learn why what I did was wrong and to make amends. But I worked hard, and now I'm home. I will always tell you the truth." Grace nods, processing this new reality. Children, even young ones, can grasp fairness and justice when adults explain them patiently. As the children grow, Maggie and Richard notice how much their approaches to parenting have shifted. They celebrate the children's successes with hugs and praise, echoing the research that connects parental affection with better mental health and resilience. They also set consistent boundaries, encouraging Grace and David to understand why rules exist. When Grace complains that her dessert portion is smaller than David's, Maggie sits with her and explains the difference between equality and equity, using simple examples. She references a story she read about how babies and toddlers show early preferences for fairness and that by age 12, children develop sophisticated beliefs about justice. Fairness isn't always about sameness, she tells Grace. It's about what each person needs. Grace nods, absorbing this nuance. Jason and Anna actively incorporate restorative practices into their home. When David breaks a toy, they ask him how he can fix the situation and how his actions affected his sister. They avoid punitive measures in favor of restorative ones, drawing from research that indicates restorative justice in schools predicts youth's bravery, fairness, and helping behavior. They teach their children to speak up when something feels unfair and to listen when others speak. They also encourage independence, allowing the children to make choices and learn from natural consequences. When Grace forgets her homework, they don't rush to deliver it to school. Instead, they discuss how forgetting impacted her day and brainstorm strategies to remember next time. These practices help the children develop responsibility and empathy. Maggie's advocacy work takes her to the state capitol, where she testifies in support of a bill that mandates county clerks to offer fraud alert services and requires real estate brokers to undergo training on deed fraud. Lawmakers listen to her with respect. Her story puts a human face on abstract policy. She cites statistics and research to support her testimony. She also highlights the importance of teaching fairness and justice early, referencing the Scientific American article that encourages parents to lean into conversations about justice rather than dismissing children's complaints. Her combination of personal narrative and research resonates. The bill passes unanimously, named the Lawson Act in her honor. It establishes mandatory fraud alerts for all property owners and includes educational material on parental responsibilities. Back at the farm, Maggie organizes community workshops. She invites Dr. Elena, Darnell, Miss Bennett, and other experts. They cover topics such as estate planning, property fraud prevention, parenting with empathy and boundaries, and restorative justice. Participants share experiences and support one another. One man recounts his own father's conditional love and how he struggles to express affection. A young mother admits she finds it hard to set limits. A retired farmer confesses he never learned about deed fraud and almost lost his property. Each story underscores the interwoven themes of fairness, love, and vigilance. After one workshop, a teenage girl approaches Maggie. "My dad and I fight all the time," she says. "He says I'm selfish. I think he's unfair. Do you have any advice?" Maggie smiles gently. "Try talking to him about why you feel things are unfair. Listen to his reasons too, and remember, fairness isn't always getting exactly the same. It's about understanding each other's needs. Love can be tough sometimes, but it's stronger when it respects boundaries." The girl nods, tears glistening in her eyes. Maggie hugs her, feeling the circle of healing extend beyond her own family. As Maggie enters her 70s, she spends more time on the porch, watching sunsets and listening to the chorus of cicadas. She writes often, filling journals with reflections on her journey. She writes about her childhood, her marriage, her son's betrayal, and their long road to reconciliation. She writes about fairness, citing the research she learned and the personal lessons she drew. She writes about unconditional love and boundaries, about how hugging a child is powerful, but so is saying no, with kindness. She writes about justice, not as retribution, but as restoration. These writings, she hopes, will one day guide her grandchildren when she is gone. One afternoon, as autumn paints the trees golden, Maggie sits with Jason on the porch swing. They watch Grace and David chase Duke across the yard. "Mom," Jason says, "do you ever wish things had turned out differently?" Maggie thinks for a long moment. "Of course," she answers. "I wish you hadn't felt the need to betray me. I wish we had taught you better when you were young. But I also see the good that came from our hardship. We're closer now than we were before. We learned lessons we wouldn't have otherwise." Jason nods. "I still feel guilty," he admits. "I don't think that will ever go away completely." "It shouldn't vanish entirely," Maggie replies softly. "Guilt reminds us of our capacity to harm, but don't let it consume you. Let it motivate you to keep doing good. Use your experience to help others avoid your mistakes. Love yourself enough to keep growing." Jason smiles, tears glistening. He has come to understand that redemption is not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice. As the sun dips behind the horizon, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, Maggie reflects on the morale of her story. Raising children requires more than love. It requires modeling fairness and enforcing boundaries. Studies have shown that unconditional affection combined with clear expectations leads to happier, healthier children. At the same time, justice must be pursued even when it hurts, because dismissing wrongdoing fosters cynicism and complacency. Maggie's journey taught her that parents cannot control every outcome. Children make their own choices. But parents can provide a foundation of love and fairness that guides them, and they can choose justice if those foundations are violated. In doing so, they honor themselves and their community. The story ends not with everything neatly resolved, but with the understanding that life is a tapestry of mistakes and redemptions. The lessons of fairness, love, and justice continue to unfold. Maggie's porch remains a place of gathering and reflection, a symbol of resilience. The cicadas sing their evening song, and the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere beyond the horizon, new storms are brewing, and new generations will face choices of their own. Maggie hopes that when they do, they will remember that fairness is not always easy, love is not always gentle, and justice is not always swift. But together, they weave a life worth living.